We have Daryl Holiday from City Bureau, we have Floyd Hall from Canopy Atlanta, and we have Yukari Kane from the Prison Journalism Project. And I'll start with you, Daryl. If you could introduce yourself, but in your introduction, just tell us a little bit about what City Bureau does, what it means for City Bureau in terms of opening up the field, and how many people you have brought, or you all have brought, into journalism.
Get off mute first. Reminder. Daryl Holiday, I'm one of the co-founders of City Bureau. We are a 6-year-old nonprofit journalism lab based in Chicago. We do a lot of things. We cultivate the information and storytelling networks that democratize access to civic power. So we equip people with skills, resources. We engage in conversations publicly. We produce information that directly impacts people's needs. And I mean, I guess in short, we're imagining new models for local media. When I think of opening up the field, I think it's pretty simple to me. I think it's really about bringing a lot more, many more people into the work of journalism, which I think is the best response to our current crisis in local media. And I think the third point was how many people. We've trained more than 1,000 people as documenters. We've trained more than 100 local reporters who have gone on to lead local newsrooms in Chicago and beyond. We've had more than 3,000 or so attendees at our public newsroom, and that's mostly all Chicago. So the replicated parts of our programs in other states and cities, would expand that number, I guess.
Thanks. And Floyd, you want to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Floyd Hall. I'm a co-founder of Canopy Atlanta. Canopy Atlanta focuses on collaborative community journalism. And for us, that means partnering, equipping Atlantans to tell stories that connect to their neighborhoods, but also partnering with these neighborhoods, and these communities to help shape and frame those stories, so that we're oftentimes presenting stories with the neighborhood, not always about the neighborhood. Our model is somewhat different from many outlets in that we focus on one neighborhood at a time in Atlanta. So there are, many hundreds of neighborhoods, cities in the Atlanta metropolitan area. But our focus now at this point is to sort of dive deep into one neighborhood and tell the story of that neighborhood at a time. And in that process, we train journalism fellows who learn from established journalists some of the tools of journalism, and we train them alongside of those established writers. We also engage a community advisory board / community engagement board, where we allow members of the community to act in the editorial process. And so for us, it's really about diving deep into a neighborhood to try to connect and raise the awareness and amplify the impact of some of their existing information systems, but also to really tap into what the community is thinking about, what they're concerned about, and try to bring those stories to the light. In terms of impact, we are entering into our second issue, so we're not quite as far along down the road as City Bureau, but each issue, we end up having 4 to 8 fellows who will be trained, but also folks who go on and hopefully will increase the pool of working journalists in the Atlanta area. So we're trying to both expand a community's bandwidth, would also impact the careers of our fellows.
Thank you. And Yukari?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Yukari Kane. I'm one of the 2 co-founders and co-executive directors of the Prison Journalism Project. We have a little bit of a specific angle, but we train incarcerated writers in the tools of journalism, and then we work with them to get them published on our site, as well as in partnership with other news organizations. outside of the echo chamber, so to speak. So we started at the beginning of the pandemic when there just wasn't a lot of information coming from inside about how prisons were coping with COVID-19. And we felt it was really important to get these voices and stories on the historical record. We started on Medium. We outgrew that in 2 months. We are now on Squarespace, and we're about to migrate to Newspack. But over the past year, we've published about 650 stories from over 300 writers across 28 states and Canada, and we're just getting started. We're doing the work. We're knee deep right now in learning and exploring ways to do journalism with them. But it's been very, very exciting.
Thank you. So I guess the sort of next big obvious question for you all is why you do this and why you chose to sort of go about your journalism this way. And in part, I'm sort of wondering who your constituents are and sort of what information they need, and what is it about this that is different than what, how traditional quote unquote journalists serve their needs. Maybe we can go in the same order, actually, Daryl.
Sure, I'll start. So yeah, I mean, I come out of the daily news world. I was a reporter for DNA Info Chicago, so I was a crime reporter for years, and I was a neighborhood reporter. And I learned a lot about how journalism functions and really how journalism fails communities through years of crime reporting, where the emphasis is on deficits, typically, less the assets of a community. We can serve to criminalize whole swaths of communities, individuals. There's a lot of reparative work to be done there. So I guess what I'm saying is that I know firsthand that the narratives that journalists can put forward, the journalism outlets can put forward, that become kind of the truth of a city, of a place. Those are very much worth working with people to correct, to bring in new voices. I'm thinking also about a study City Bureau did a few years ago at the Center for Media Engagement. We interviewed 900 Chicagoans, separated by geographies. We knew where they were. We found that people in the top and west sides of the city, which are primarily, our more Black and brown areas of the city, thought that news did a worse job of showing what's going on in their area, thought that the stories were too negative about their area, thought the stories quoted the wrong people, and they were less likely to have met a journalist. So all of these factors, South and West Side folks were more likely to have experienced. On the other hand, they were also much more likely to want to get involved with newsrooms to correct this daily reality. So I guess the long story short is that we know that there's interest and eagerness from the public to get involved in these sort of, reimagined, more curative approaches to journalism. And so that's why we got into this, to create those kind of mechanisms that really allow for civic action, civic engagement, for people to be involved in the production, distribution of news that impacts their lives, their blocks. I'll end there. That was a little bit of a rant.
So from the perspective of Canopy Atlanta, I think it's important to maybe talk about how we got started and how we kind of came together as co-founders. A few years back, it's hard to sort of manage your time now because of the pandemic, but a few years back, I think 2018, 2019, about 20 journalists locally in Atlanta sort of got together. And these were folks who had bylines, all of the in-town publications, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Atlanta Magazine, others, Creative Loafing, as well as national bylines as well. Kind of just got together and began to talk about the state of journalism in the city and what was or was not being covered and how it was being covered. My background is primarily arts, culture, and business. And so we kind of all from different, focus areas began to just meet and think about what could we do to impact the ecosystem in Atlanta. And there was a pretty big gap between the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is sort of at the top of that strata, or the sort of publication of record, from there to a lot of the neighborhood papers that may have one or two people sort of working to get stories out. And so within that space, we just felt like there were lots of stories that either weren't being captured from an interest or from a capacity standpoint. And we wanted to think through, well, how can we both provide space to tell those stories, but also can we really impact the amount of people who are interested in their neighborhoods and telling those stories? And I think for us, when we talk about this notion of expanding the field, we begin with this premise of wanting to identify and work with folks who may have skills or interests that may align with journalism, but maybe they never knew that they had those skills, or maybe they never knew how that particular just passion could flow into journalism. And so we're trying to really sort of capture folks who may be on the fringe of that, and give them some additional training to then be able to be better stewards of the stories of their neighborhoods. And so for us, like, that's sort of the big why we got into this. And I think why we sort of have adopted the model that we have of really investing deeply into our fellows for our training, but also into our community boards for their input into framing the stories from a perspective that isn't about, that isn't always, I guess, about the sort of like casual news stories that you may find that relate to crime or traffic or things of that nature in Atlanta.
So I've actually been a business journalist covering technology for over 15 years before I started doing this. And when I began teaching journalism, I just kind of, by coincidence, got an email one day. I was in San Francisco at the time, and found out that San Quentin News, which is the one of the few entirely prisoner-run newspapers inside prison, was looking for an instructor to teach men who wanted to write for the paper. And so I started, that's how I got involved in incarcerated journalism. And, it was just completely perspective changing to connect the dots between a lot of the societal problems that we're covering all the time and incarceration, but also just the sheer breadth and depth of stories that existed inside. And it was, clear that if I wanted to write about them, I would never get in as deep as I could, or I would want to, and B, they just felt like stories that should be told from the inside. And as I did this work, it was, I realized how possible it was to do journalism, and how there are already incarcerated journalists. And so out of that came the Prison Journalism Project. I partnered with a co-partner who was doing something similar on the East Coast. And so now she is at Penn State. And so the Prison Journalism Project kind of is housed at Penn State. So in our case, it's, it was interesting, all the things that Daryl said, because our writers feel the same way. Nobody's interested in hearing them. And so that's kind of the area where we operate. And there are some publications, a lot of it is in this echo chamber of people who already understand and know that criminal justice is important. We thought it was important for them to be writing and to be heard outside of the echo chamber, that if we could help support thoughtful journalism, it can shift the narrative and shed light in a way that couldn't be from outside. And we were definitely helped by the fact that there has been more and more great journalism about criminal justice, the Marshall Project, projects at ProPublica and the Post and such. And so, we think the time is right. And we're starting to explore ways of doing journalism with them. A lot of times we're finding that the first major step that they take is to think of themselves as journalists. And every day the ideas for stories come pouring in.
It's really just notable to me listening to the three of you talk, just how you're just asking a different question, because often when I think a lot of newsrooms do know that there's like a broken connection between them and perhaps the communities they want to cover, but instead of asking the question, well, how can we do a better job? It's also like, well, why can't the communities cover themselves? And I think that's a really sort of compelling approach to it. So it's pretty awesome. So I guess my next question is, how is it hard to get people interested, and how do you do that in your work?
I can jump in. So we've looked into this. So we asked documenters, I'll use documenters, one of our 3 programs as an example here. The application to become a documenter has a lot of different questions that just help us understand who they are better. And we often ask how they learned about the program. And we found repeatedly that the majority of people who become documenters learn about the program from other documenters. So word of mouth is by and large the most frequent way that people hear about it, which I think is interesting. Our problem isn't so much how to spread the word, it's almost the opposite problem. It's how do we raise capacity to meet the demand? Kind of how I was going back to before. Like we know that people want to work with newsrooms and journalists to do this work. So finding them isn't the problem. Making the systems that are equitable, making the processes that are welcoming, that is actually the hard work. I'd also mention that I think I've been trying to think about ways, and I would love if anyone has thoughts, please drop in the chat. I'd love to add some advice here. Trying to find ways to talk about journalism without talking about journalism. I think when you talk about journalism, it's a very like opaque industry. People end up seeing like the final product, and they don't really get to see all the work that goes into it. I think when you mention journalism or news, people think about TV news, which I think a lot of us here are not really talking about. So there's a lot of these little like pitfalls in talking about journalism when we're really talking something different. So finding different ways to talk about it, community narratives, telling your story, information equity. I'm sure there's far more ways, but I've been really fascinated by, how we sort of just reshape that conversation to allow that one-to-one exchange. I think we're missing by talking about the industry of like journalism.
Floyd and Yukari.
Yeah, I mean, how we find people, our experience is kind of similar in a way to Daryl. A lot of it is word of mouth. We did initially start by putting out a call for submissions in Prison Legal News, which is a publication that is widely read inside. And we work a lot with prison education programs, especially during COVID when almost all visitations and outside volunteers couldn't go in. We took advantage of programs that were able to get things inside, and I think some of the interest that we've seen has been because people inside have just it's been a rough year for all of us, but it's been a really rough year for them, not being able to see their families, having programs canceled, and education programs, the lack of availability of a lot of things that they've done in the past jobs, opened up a lot of time and frustration and even more disenfranchisement. So I think our writers found us as an outlet to express themselves and then we're still ramping up on the training, but there are some prisons where there are a lot of programs. The majority of prisons don't, and so the pandemic kind of guided us to a way where writers can participate, even if they're the only person who wants to in the prison. But over time, we've also found that word of mouth. We get these. There's a prison digital messaging system called JPay, and we'll get JPay mail from some of our writers saying, so-and-so wants to write, so can you send them some information? And so we send them information. We rely heavily on US postal mail.
I think that, for us, and every city is different, but I'll just speak on how Atlanta kind of works. Atlanta is a city that it's 5 million people, metropolitan area, but the city of Atlanta itself is only 500,000 people. So there's lots of people who live in the metropolitan area, but live in smaller either cities that are, edge cities around Atlanta, or just in the metropolitan area that may have different information systems, different policymakers, all of that. And I think for us, one of the interesting things has been to really sort of hopefully break down this narrative that a journalist is an external person. Like in so many instances, we think of journalists as someone coming from the outside in. And I think for us, we're trying to really change that from thinking about a journalist being from the inside out. And every neighborhood or region or area has its own way of spreading information around. And for us, it's just trying to tap into that. So some neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta function differently than other neighborhoods outside of it. When you bring in ethnicity and culture, that also plays a role into it, depending on sort of where certain neighborhoods, like how they've evolved over time and sort of who's in those places. So for us, for our upcoming issue, we had to, really think through how could we connect to the Vietnamese community and the Spanish community, because like in Forest Park, where we're based our next issue, that's very different from West End Atlanta, which is our first issue. And so we're thinking around, how are communities coming together? Where are they coming together? Also, so we go out to the neighborhoods, figure out how do people move in the neighborhood, certain parks, certain just areas of intersection, and how can we sort of place ourselves in those spaces to connect with folks and get our message out by being on the ground, really. And then going beyond that to help to drive home that message that with interest, a lot of people can, not anyone, but really anyone, really, if you're interested and you're exposed to the certain, tools of the trade, you can be a journalist. And so we try to hopefully break down those barriers of how people see journalists, to say, if you're interested in this, then we can train you in a way that will help you become what you seek. And I think that's been something that's been really beneficial for us, at least at this early stage with Canopy.
So how do you all go about training the fellows and documenters and writers that you work with? And I guess alongside that, do you have fact-checking systems, and how do you manage the editing and stuff?
Yeah, so for us, we have a great fellows training coordinator, Camille Whitaker. And so because I think everyone on our staff is working at a publication already, so we have some resources to sort of bring into that. But typically throughout the training process, we have all of our fellows, it's a 6-week process, and we are bringing in professionals from the Atlanta area who are working in journalism. So if it's, if we're talking about pitching, we're talking about following leads, if we're talking about interviewing, we're talking about fact checking, editing, like the full process, we're exposing them to individuals who work in those spaces in the Atlanta area. And then we also partner them with mentors, depending on what their area of interest is. We can partner them with folks who are in that space professionally, and then give them more access to resources and information. And we employ the same sort of behind the scenes process of fact checking and copy editing and all of those things that you would find at other publications, but we just try to do it with more transparency, both with the fellow in mind, so they can understand how this evolves, how a story evolves, but then also with our community advisory boards and engagement boards, we involve them at certain parts of the actual process so that they're aware of what's being covered and how that's coming along, and they can give input at the appropriate time. So we try to, some ways, create access and bandwidth for our young writers, but also for the established writers as well. We try to create just a lot of open access and transparency and support for that process, so that we can have hopefully a free and productive flow of information and resources.
For us, transparency is definitely the biggest thing, because we have too many writers. A lot of them are raw writers, and they're very difficult to reach. And so we don't have an editing back and forth in principle, except for a handful of them. And what we tell our writers is that we give them a professional edit, and that if we got something wrong, they can write and we'll fix that, or we can remove the story if they don't like the way it's been edited. And then we have a disclaimer at the bottom of every story and that says that we don't fact check. And that's kind of a catch-all to cover us. Of course, we don't want to get anything wrong, so we do have our editors do basic fact checking of institution names, groups, data. We're very careful with data. If we can't find it, we take it out. Most of the time, their numbers are wrong, either because there's no attribution or there's no it's old material that they have from the prison library. And so and so for us, it's it's kind of where we are now and where we want to be. Where we want to be is to be able to staff a fact checking a fact checker to make sure that the stories that we're really featuring are correct. In terms of training, we're all journalism professors at universities. I teach at Northwestern. My partner teaches at Penn State. We have a director that teaches at University of California in Santa Cruz. And so, and then the training team includes journalism professors at UMass Amherst, and then the people who have training experience in media organizations. And so we're trying to intentionally develop that because it's all posto based. We're developing a correspondence based handout based system, and then using our publication as a way to for them to work on some of the tools. Again, we're very careful. We don't call our writers journalists, and unless they progress through our training program. We talk about training them in the tools of journalism. And we have one correspondent at San Quentin who has been intentionally working with us to explore how we can tell stories from the inside in different ways. We're kind of figuring it out and just trying not to be afraid to make mistakes and listening to our writers to see how we can best help them.
I could talk about this all day. I'll try to be very brief. Our reporting fellows, they basically get journalism school education in 11 weeks. Our documenters, for folks who don't know what the program is, we send anyone out to public meetings. So your city council, the police board, et cetera, all those sub-advisory committees, on and on, the machinery of government. They live tweet, they take notes, they take photos, they take video. So all of those skills, we've basically broken them apart. They're all journalism skills, and teach them individually, because we believe that everyone can learn these skills that journalists may use as a set. Individually, they can be democratized. And then we have editors, as you might expect, edit work, give feedback to these documenters who are learning kind of on the go. And we publish different kinds of news products, like newsletters that summarize what's happening in government. So everything is fact-checked, edited as you would expect, but tied with this more participatory media system.
Thanks. And I want to make sure we have some time for people to ask questions. I see that there's a lively chat, but I haven't been able to look at it. Michelle, do you know if there are any?
Some of the questions have been touched on. People were looking for some resources. There is a lot of support for a boilerplate list of trainings or menu list of skills community-based nonprofit news sources can use. I don't know if any of y'all have any suggestions on where people can go for such a list, but I'll throw that one out. For the rest of you, if you'd like to ask a question yourself, just let me know in the chat and I can call on you. If you'd rather have me read the question for you, I can do that too. Just let me know.
I just wanted to say something about the resources. For us, the work that we do isn't meant for us. The more we can train our journalists and send them out writing for you all, the more, that's what we consider success. And along the same lines with journalism education, we don't want to keep what we're developing to ourselves. So we do have plans for creating an open syllabus bank, sharing our materials for reuse, et cetera. We've essentially started a year ago. We're still trying to fundraise. We're an all volunteer team. So what is on our list of things to do, and the interest we're getting is much greater than the funds we have. So we'll get them out as we can find support for them, but it will be shareable. And we'd be happy to share too on an individual basis if anybody wanted to.
There is a question from Erica Garber. Can you go back to the earlier question? What are some good ways to involve a community advisory board?
I'll jump in here. I think that for us, it's starting early in the process. So I can only speak to what we've done thus far, but I think for us, we try to engage them early on and lay out what their expectations are, how we want to work with fellows, how we want to work with our established journalists in a way that both gives them agency, but also hopefully doesn't slow up the process at all. We want to create a space where they're able to be as effective as possible in letting it be known what they care about in their community. But then once we're into the process of training and reporting, we really want to support our fellows and our journalists in that space as well. So I think engaging them early enough before we haven't even assigned stories yet, just to give them enough time to get comfortable with what we're doing and to know that their input is valued, but then sort of creating a bit of a inflection point, if you will, in that process of really investing in the process of actually making the actual issue, and then bringing them back in at a certain point to sort of see what we've done. So I think that's how we've done it thus far. I'll be interested to hear how City Bureau may do anything like that. Daryl?
We don't have a community advisory board. We've thought about it, but don't. We have a community of practice that I think is on the very same lines, really geared towards this idea of informing, engaging, equipping, but also like relationships that people make when they are, learning together, they're acting together. So the community practice that we have, I think it fills some of the same needs as an advisory board, but we're really looking more to support it as it creates different projects, different book clubs. If anything, I'm more of an advisor to that community practice than anything else. They're making their own things based off of what they're learning with us.
And also just I was just going to add also our community advisory boards, or community engagement boards as we're calling them now, they change out for every issue. So for every issue in every neighborhood, we start that process over again, where we engage more community members per issue. So the West End issue had community advisory board. The Forest Park issue will have separate members from the Forest Park community who will be part of that board. So it's something that we sort of build into the cycle of every issue for all of the different neighborhood issues that we'll have going forward.
I noticed a question from Lloyd Jacobson about the format of trainings. And I remember you said something about sending things in to prospective writers. I was wondering, maybe could you talk a little more about that? And Daryl, if you could talk a little bit about your sort of virtual, how you like do your trainings with the documenters.
We start with an extensive call for submissions. So we try to provide a lot of guidance on the kind of thing that we're looking for. And then we also have writing prompts. We have a list of writing prompts. I think it's a 4-page list of ways that they can start. And so initially we're inviting them essentially to send in essays, which is, the medium, the genre that's easiest for them to start with. And then we have ways of tagging stories and prioritizing stories to identify the strongest writers. And if they've submitted and published a certain number of stories, we invite them to be contributing writers. And as we do that, bear in mind that our writers can't read their own stories online, so we send them copies. And so every time we send them a piece of mail, we send them a resource. And so some of the resources we have, editorial policies, just what can you write about and what can you not write about. They're pretty standard, but for example, we don't publish stories that reopen their cases or are about their cases, for example. We don't publish stories that re-victimize people, and so that's a learning process as well. And then otherwise, we have a 4-page, very, very tight intro to journalism handout, trying to put structure and things in 2 paragraphs at the most. And part of the reason why we keep them tight, it makes them better, tighter instruction sheets, but we also are dealing with mail restrictions. And so some prisons set restrictions of no more than 3 to 5 pages. So we try to conform to that. We have a 1-pager on how to write an op-ed. So the idea for PJ School is that each teaching would be one handout, and it would be divided and, read this, try this, keep this. And then every few handouts, we would ask them to write something for us to publish with using some of those skills. And so, what we're ultimately trying to teach them is to be intentional observers and recorders, and to be careful with facts. In prison, there are a lot of rumors, and rumors have their place, and so reporting on the rumor is fine, but just make sure that it's clear that it's a rumor. Make sure in the story that you're telling us how you got this information. Is it a rumor? Did you hear it from your cellies friend? Is it something you overheard corrections officers talking about? We like all of that information as long as we know how it's how they've gotten it. Where we're kind of the challenge, and where I'm still trying to figure out is, when the Derek Chauvin verdict came in, we asked them to send us dispatches interviewing people around them about how they felt, what the reactions were, and they did great. They got corrections officers to talk, people in these prison staff, in addition to people around them, and some of them named their sources, others didn't. And even though we explained that they could only use names if they'd gotten permission, there's no way of knowing for sure. And so that's an area where we feel like we have to send more information in. The other area that we're just starting to think about is First Amendment. People inside prison have First Amendment rights, but they don't have control over really anything. And so retaliation is a big thing. And so if they do report on something that begins to matter out here, what are the ramifications, and how do we educate on that?
Yukar, there's a question. Would you be willing to share your 4-page intro to journalism and how to write an op-ed and similar documents?
Absolutely, for sure. I'm at Yukari at prisonjournalismproject.org, so please reach out.
Question from Danny Bergstrom. How do you frame conversations around ethics with the journalists you work with?
Want to take that?
We have our final 3 minutes, by the way.
Yeah. Maybe Daryl or Floyd would be better placed. We're still developing this. Communication is a big challenge, so it has to be done through letters.
Floyd, I'll pass it to you. Danny and I are colleagues in some ways, so we can talk later.
I think we through our training try to make sure that we are employing certain standards in our practices that will be suitable for all the publications that we want our journalists to write for in the Atlanta area and beyond. So part of our model is also trying to create spaces for folks to spaces for journalists to co-publish. So stories may run in Canopy Atlanta, but also may run with Atlanta Magazine, or may also run with Bitter Southerner, perhaps. So we're trying to make sure that our standards are on the same level as all of the other media standards that our writers write for. So in our training, when we talk about that, we try to make sure that we're bringing up ethics and conflict of interest, and how you report a story, how many sources you need to have, how you confirm your sources, and we try to make sure that we're being as transparent about that as possible.
Well, we are in our final minute. It's okay if we go a little bit over. There is a bit of a cushion between sessions, so I'll just ask Loretta to find out if there are any final comments.
Sure. I mean, maybe if there was a question that we were gonna talk about, maybe in the last 60 seconds, you guys can try, but how do you compensate your writers and your documenters? And like, I mean, both from the logistics standpoint and also do you, how much and everything. I feel like that may be useful for folks.
Pay people, please, please pay people. All the documenters sites in Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, and I'm not sure what Fresno's rate is, but they're between $16 and $22 an hour, depending on the cost of living for that area. And we bump that number up according to our own, our organization. So yeah, they get paid by the hour. We have that all kind of bracketed out, so we know exactly what it costs to pay a documenter for X amount of time, and how much we need for the entire system. So yeah, we pay folks.
We're currently an all volunteer team, and so that is absolutely a goal. Right now we can't, although we just started a few months ago as kind of a story of the week program where we identify the best story and we pay them. And we pay $50. And that for us is a placeholder. It's a way to begin, and it's a way, and it's a reminder to us that we have to get to our goal. But what we also do is we work with our writers one-on-one to help them pitch stories to other publications. We kind of play the role of bureau chief, and so we'll do pre-edits. We'll pitch. We also help them with the paperwork afterwards, contracts, invoices, and things, and just kind of make sure to be their advocate. And in those cases, we pass on 100% of the payment that they receive. We agree with Daryl. Like we don't believe in just getting stories out, and so we do try to connect them with paying gigs, and then while we're also working towards our goal to pay them ourselves.
Yeah, at Canopy, all of our fellows get a stipend and also paid the same as what we pay all of our normal journalists. So that's 50 to 60 cents a word for a story. At this point, we're hoping to increase that, but that's what we're paying right now. So yeah, pay your folks.
Great. Okay. Well, we have reached the bottom of the hour. I'll just give one more chance. Any final thoughts or comments before we wrap up? Okay, if not, I just want to thank all of our participants, our panelists, and those attending in the audience. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your day with us, and I hope that you found this useful.